President Zelenskyy has stressed the importance of ending the war in Ukraine next year through intensified diplomatic efforts. His remarks also suggested that the conflict might conclude more swiftly under a Trump administration. As policies shift and Ukraine faces ongoing challenges on the battlefield, questions loom about the path forward for both the nation and global diplomacy. Joining us today on TVP World to share her insight is Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So, just very recently, Zelenskyy called for an end to the war through diplomacy. Now, marks a very striking shift in his stance, where he said today that we must do everything we can to bring a war to an end through diplomacy. What gives?
It is an extraordinary development that has taken place today, and that follows the phone call between Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin also this week, which was another remarkable development. And I think it's clear that Zelenskyy is seeing the circumstances shift in the West. With the election of Donald Trump, and also Olaf Scholz signaling some sort of desire to relaunch communications with Vladimir Putin. Obviously, Scholz is not saying that Germany or any other country will support Putin in any way, but this is the first phone call in 2 years, and we're also seeing Donald Trump, whose policy on Ukraine is unclear, apart from the fact that he has promised to end the war within 24 hours of taking office. So Zelenskyy is clearly positioning himself and Ukraine for a very different reality, and it's unclear what exactly it means with it needs to happen for the war to end in 2025 with a diplomatic solution. But he is reading the room, or indeed the world, I should say, and concluding that something significant will change and will need to change.
Right. Speaking of that phone call you just mentioned earlier, just yesterday, Zelenskyy criticized Germany's Scholz for speaking with Vladimir Putin, saying that he essentially opened the Pandora's box. Do you think this signals some crack when it comes to European Union regarding unity regarding Ukraine?
It did. Now, Scholz had notified Zelenskyy of that call, so it didn't come as a surprise. But nevertheless, Scholz did have a phone call with Putin, a lengthy phone call, which he seems to have initiated on the basis of domestic policy considerations in Germany. Germany is heading to an election, into an election very soon, and Scholz wants to be seen as somebody who is willing to bring the war to an end by having some sort of communications with Putin. Unsurprisingly, the phone call was not welcome news to Ukraine, which had previously been promised by its Western partners that they will do nothing without Ukraine being a participant in it. Now, this phone call was between Scholz and Putin, and it didn't involve Zelenskyy, so it can't have been welcome news for the Ukrainians. And as Zelenskyy rightly said, it will open a Pandora's box, because now other leaders may conclude that it would be a good idea for them too to hold conversations with Putin. Now, they may not make any concessions, but the fact that this phone call has taken place signals for Putin that his time in complete isolation from the West, or almost complete isolation from the West, is over.
Right, and speaking of ending the war through diplomacy and isolation from the West, Zelenskyy actually cited that as one of the possible incentives for Putin to come to the negotiation table. To quote the Ukrainian president himself, he says that he doesn't think Putin wanted peace at all, but the fact that he might be able to come out of this political isolation might be one of his incentives. Do you think, ending geopolitical isolation is indeed enough of an incentive for Putin to come to the negotiation table? Like you just mentioned, perhaps Scholz already opened the Pandora's box, and that kind of isolation is already waning.
The isolation is already declining, but we should remember that it was never complete isolation. And this is, I think, has been the really unpleasant surprise for the West in this war, that other countries, non-Western countries, didn't follow the West in imposing sanctions and isolating Russia. It was only the West, meaning Western, well, Europe, North America, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and a few more countries. They were the only ones that were serious about isolating Russia. Other countries said, well, hang on, we will keep trading with Russia. We are not going to isolate Russia. And we saw that most recently with the BRICS meeting in Kazan, where leaders from non-Western countries gathered, and Putin was very much not isolated. And we have seen it also with various African leaders maintaining relations with him. So his isolation, Russia's isolation, has never been complete. And this is, I think, has been the really unpleasant surprise for the West, that so few other countries went along with the sanctions, went along with the support of Ukraine, and that the West has stood there pretty alone trying to support Ukraine in this war.
Right, and like you mentioned earlier, this shift in Zelensky's stance to pursue ending the war through diplomacy is a major shift indeed. Just a few days ago, the Ukrainian defense minister actually stated that they are still fighting with the express goal of taking back every inch of land, and specifically the defense minister also mentioned taking back Crimea. Do you think that these sort of offensive strategy will have some kind of mismatch with Zelensky's kind of diplomatic strategy going forward? Are there going to be some disconnect?
Well, Zelensky, being a good leader, would never say anything other than we want all our territory back. And then, of course, if there were to be negotiations, that the Ukrainians may offer something different, but going into the negotiations or prospective negotiations, nobody ever offers concessions in advance. So he will keep insisting or making the case that Ukraine should have all its territory back, and will keep fighting to get it back. And let's see if negotiations do come to pass. Let's see what happens there. But we should also remember that Ukraine has the right to insist on getting all its territory back, and Zelensky is within its rights to insist on Ukraine getting all its territory back. But then negotiations are a give and take, and if negotiations were to come to pass, we may see something different there. And I think this is where we really need to watch. If negotiations do materialize, that will be a game changer. And we will also see outcomes. We may see outcomes that are quite different from the ones we might hope for.
Right. Since we're on the topic of the art of the deal, we have to direct our attention also to the Zelensky statement that he suggested the war could end faster under Donald Trump. What do you think this statement signifies?
Well, once again, Zelensky is an excellent communicator. He knows that Trump is now in charge as of January, but de facto he is already in charge. Biden won't be able to achieve very much during his last weeks in office, and certainly he's not going to make strategic. He's not going to be able to develop a new strategy during these last few weeks. So now Trump is the man whom Zelensky has to win over, and what better way of winning him over than flattering him? And there is also a point. There's also an aspect of truth to what Zelensky says. If you, as the leader of a country, appear to be so unpredictable, you can actually frighten the other side into concessions. And that's what Nixon realized during the Vietnam War, with what he called the madman strategy. He had in mind that he would seem to be so crazy that that the North Vietnamese thought that he would be capable of escalating very dramatically, and that would then force them into concessions. And I think that is where Trump is too, that he is so unpredictable. He is seen as somewhat mad, and that could paradoxically make Russia more frightened of him than it was of Biden, or has been of Biden, because Biden is obviously still in charge.
Right. Now, Trump has notoriously claimed that he would solve the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Hyperbole aside, how realistic is settling the war within a short window, given all these complexities?
Even a short window of even somewhat longer than a week, it will be very difficult. So you may achieve within a shorter time frame. You may achieve something like a general agreement to end the war, but any war is a very complex thing. It requires negotiations, and those negotiations are not done by the 2 or the 3 or the 4 or 5 or 6 main leaders in the room. It's done. Those negotiations about the details are carried out by ministers and even more likely by officials, and they will have to haggle over lots of details. So it's not going to be quick. What Trump may be able to achieve is that sort of general agreement that the war should end quickly, and then he leaves the rest to his officials and indeed to other countries' officials, including the officials of Ukraine, who will be very, if this comes to pass, if negotiations come to pass, Ukrainian officials will be very careful and detail-oriented, so that they don't, nothing that Ukraine could get slips out of Ukraine's hands.
Thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World. Cheers.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.